Yeah.
Welcome, Terry, to the Creating Strength podcast. My name is Lauren Kennedy. Terry, so thank you so much for being on the show today. I'm excited. You're my first video podcast interview that I'm throwing on YouTube. So you're the first. So that's super cool. I appreciate you being on the show. Why don't you start us off? Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
All right. Thank you, Lauren. And hey, I'm excited to be the first. To be the first of anything is always maybe you get to set the standard, and hopefully that standard is really good for you. But a little bit about myself. I'm born and raised in Omaha, Nebraska, and still here. I have been in learning and development for about 20 years. Funny thing, how I got into learning and development is I used to be a business analyst, for the people that know me, analyst and my personality do not go together. So in that role, I had the opportunity to do some training. My manager came and asked and said, "Hey, we need to do a user training, and you're fairly new. You're not so far in the weeds, so I think you'd be a great trainer for this because you can speak the user language." And it was something I actually had to think about for a couple of days because I hadn't trained before. I didn't think I could do it, and then I said yes. And then that really kicked off my training career because I stayed in that role for another three or 4 years. And then I had the opportunity to move into human resources. So that's how I got into training. And, some of my hobbies, you asked me about myself. Like I like to go to the gym. I like to work out. I like to read. And it's funny. I love personal development. So I train in my 9 to 5. And as we spoke before, I train in my 5 to 9 in my side business.
We sound so much alike. I'm like reading, going to the gym, but I find in learning and development, people often just kind of fall into it. Yeah. I fell into it. I actually I didn't know this existed. Being a personal trainer, I'm like, yes, I know that part of development exists, but I never thought about like the corporate world. People need to be trained in the corporate world. And so, I started as an instructional designer and just kind of grew from there. And I started meeting a lot more people in this whole profession and a lot of the same stories. Like it was just an accident. Yeah. So that's awesome. So tell me about where you're at right now, because you have your business, like kind of a side business where you do leadership development. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, one of the things I decided on the side was, you have corporate training and, you train to the corporate initiatives, which I absolutely love because I love helping organizations do that. But the thing I wanted to do was, create a framework. There's so much need, like you said, there's a huge need for training and development that I don't think people consider. Sometimes they wait for their organizations to do it. Sometimes their organizations don't do it. So I wanted to be able to create a framework that was another opportunity for me to be, a little bit more myself. Take the corporate tie off, so to speak, and build a framework that works for me, that I know works for some other people that maybe have not been exposed to training and development and leadership development. So the way I got into this was actually I went to a Best Place to Work luncheon, and I had a free ticket. Working in HR, I had a free ticket, and I had an opportunity to hear the winners speak, and they talk about their organization. And the funny thing is, the first thing I noticed is everybody who won or who has won or wins, I noticed they're not trying to win it. Yeah. It's just their natural ability to create that culture. So I started to notice after I went to 3 in a row, there are 3 things that are pretty common around these leaders that are creating this culture of a best place to work. Is one, they know who they need to create the culture. They know who they are in creating that culture. They know how to leverage their strengths, and they also know how to ignite what I call other people's superpowers. And then they also know how to develop themselves, nurture themselves, and they also know how to nurture the relationships of others. So from that, I created this WIN formula that I use in my coaching and also in my training. So that's kind of how I process everything from workshops to speaking is, how do you win at the work that you do, and how do you win in your leadership journey?
So that's really, really cool. I like how you're approaching that. You must have seen, so like you've been in training and development now for how long?
About 20 years now.
20 years.
Yep.
So what do you think that you've seen throughout that time that really sets those people apart from, the people that they're not trying to win? So what are they doing right that other companies aren't doing? Like, what are you seeing that it's like, if companies just fix these things compared to the people that are winning, you say they're not trying to win, they must be doing something different. What are those things that you've seen over the years?
What I noticed, and this really became apparent when I started coaching, and the coaches or the leaders that struggle, I noticed they were leading from the outside in as opposed from leading from the inside out. And what I mean by that is leading from the outside in is I'm leading how I was led, or I'm leading how this organization has imposed that on me. So it's like leadership has been inflicted on them, as opposed to leadership is something that they really want to do, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Because I think when you lead from the inside out, that, as I mentioned before, you have great clarity on who you are. And when you have great clarity on who you are, you recognize that everybody's not the same as you. So you recognize what pieces of this organization or what pieces of what I'm trying to build or my vision do I need? So I know who I am. Who else do I need? And those people are very comfortable in working with those different types of styles to create a team. And then, going to the I part of that win is I leverage my strength. So if I use my strength as being a relator and being a person that can build relationships, but I don't have that analytical side. How do I bring somebody in that has that analytical side? So I leverage my relationship building skills to bring that person in and let them leverage their strengths as an analytical that helps, move towards that vision. And then as the organization grows, or as the journey grows, or the vision changes, relationships have to change. And the biggest piece of that is being able to have empathy for understanding how somebody thinks, understanding where someone else comes from, and understanding their contributions. So that's the biggest difference, I think, in leaders who struggle and ones who don't, is they leading from the inside out is being very comfortable, high self-awareness, and just knowing that the skills that they have aren't enough. We need more, and just being able to build those relationships.
So as you're talking, I'm just thinking like that, having empathy and realizing you're leading from the inside out, you really have to admit where you're great, where you're not so good, and what your weaknesses are. And you have to be willing to confront those. And I find that a lot of people, I shouldn't say a lot of people, but it's hard to admit when you're not good at something. And sometimes if you're put into like new managers, if you're put into that position, you don't want to admit that you're not good at something. So can you speak more to what you've seen when you address these things, like from the leaders that can say, yeah, I need to work on this and I need to bring that person in to help, as I'm not analytical, so I need to build that relationship and have them help me, versus that person who doesn't want to acknowledge those things. Can you talk more about that?
I'll speak to that from, I don't know if you're one of the leaders in self-awareness, leading researchers is Tasha Eurich. And I don't know if you've heard of her. She's written a book called Insights, and she speaks about 4 different awareness archetypes is what she calls them. And so the first one is an introspector, and an introspector is so they have low external self-awareness, but they have high internal self-awareness. So introspect means they know a lot about themselves, but they don't spend a lot of energy learning what others have, right?
Yeah.
And then the second one is a seeker, where they have actually low internal self-awareness, but they have high external self-awareness. So they're more of looking to understand others, but they don't spend a lot of energy understanding themselves. And then you have what people are called pleasers. Pleasers are they just move at the whim of what they think is best for the moment that's going to benefit them, right?
Yeah.
So you please somebody, so you're not living with your values. And then you have the people who are aware. And these are the people that I'm talking about who I say win. They're aware because they have that high self-awareness of, okay, here's what I can do. Here's where I need help at. And they have a high self-regard. And when I say high self-regard is they're, like you said, they're okay with saying, I don't know. And I think sometimes in our culture, education, and I think even if you think about the job interview process, we had that conversation before the podcast started. Sometimes we get caught in saying everything we're good at because that's what we think people want to hear. And even in the education system, the whole idea is you get graded on what you know, and it's what you know by yourself, because it's most of the time in the education system you don't work in teams, right? So I think we've been indoctrinated to show the best side of us and not really talk about where we struggle at. And I think the people that win have, for maybe it's natural to them, maybe they've learned it along the way, is to be able to have a good balance of both. I'm really good at this, but this is where I need help with, and how do I mesh those two things together? So just having that mindset to say, okay, this is where I'm good at, this is where I can contribute, here's where I need help, and marrying those things together. And I know for some people that's a process, but like I mentioned before, some people it just comes naturally to them.
Yeah, and I think speaking to like followers, they want a leader who's willing to say, hey, I don't have all the answers, I don't know, I'm willing to find out, or these are the areas I need to work on, rather than pretending like they have no flaws or they have nothing that they need to work on. Like, that's a hard person to follow, that's a hard person to grant leadership to. So what is it about training and development and leadership that really lights you up, and that you love so much?
I think for me, this goes back to, I used to coach a lot of youth sports, and my first entry into coaching was coaching first graders in basketball. And I would love the process in the beginning. So you have the first practice and you've got maybe 2 kids who can dribble the ball, but the rest of them, they can't even dribble. So watching the process of watching them learn how to dribble, then learn how to dribble to the basket, then learn how to dribble to the basket, take a shot, and then make a shot, and then seeing the expression on their face of that gradual progression as the season went along. I think that's something that was a seed that was planted in me, because when I had the opportunity to start training, I started to see that, and it took me back to those days to where when we had a process improvement and people didn't think beyond the current process, and then we would train on a new process and say, oh, I can do this now. And just being able to see the expressions on people's faces, I would say that was something that just fueled me to continuously see that. And then along the way, at the time that I was a business analyst, I also had the opportunity to speak to high school kids and college kids across the country. So I did a lot of speaking on educational and career success. And in those talks, you can look at certain faces in the audience and you see that light bulb come on after, we talk about, what's a better way to study? What are the strategies to get into college? How do I better understand what career that I want to go after? Or how do I create more possibilities with a different type of mindset? So again, that it took me back to that young Terry Lee coaching basketball and seeing those faces light up. And then when I got into coaching and leadership development, and you have more of that one-on-one, and you have those conversations, and you help people process an obstacle or something that may be blocking them. And most of the time it's just a mindset. And then when you see that mindset change, or you see that mindset shift to say, okay, here are greater possibilities. Here's how I can leverage my potential differently, and just helping them navigate that conversation. That is just something that just fuels my fire, as you asked before.
Oh my gosh. So that light bulb, I talk about that all the time, that those are the moments that's why we do what we do, because we want to create those moments where, oh, I get it now.
Yeah.
To take them over those bridges that they start out, like new hires are so nervous to get started. They don't know what they're in for. And you can make a welcoming environment, make it safe. And then, the end of training, they're much more relaxed, they're happy, and they get that look on their face. And I've been in trainings where, you know, there's always some people that are a little resistant. Yeah. They don't want a different perspective, or they, especially in sales, you know, they've been in sales for a really long time. So it's hard. Like, I don't need training. I don't need any of this. So they're a little closed, right? And to bring them from, you know, that to being more open, where that light bulb goes off and that look on their face, oh, I'm getting it. So I've also trained people that, you know, going from a completely different industry to something totally new, it's, you know, those nerves are there.
Yeah.
And that look on their face, and like, oh, I can do this. And those one-on-one coachings, when, you know, it's super hard, you see it, and they're like, I promise you'll get through this. You know, if you don't like that, you shouldn't be in learning and development. Like, I think most people would agree that there's so many things that we do behind the scenes, but when you get, like, it reminds me of being a personal trainer, when I'd have women come in like, I can't lift that much weight. I'm like, yes, you can. Like, I know that you can. And I always tell people, I'm like, I believe in people before they believe. That's my job. It's my job to believe in you. You'll catch up, but like, I can already see it, and I'm going to help you visualize that. So those moments, again, like, not knowing that this existed, it's like, oh, I can see that kind of face in those light bulb moments. I'm like, oh, I can do it. She was right. I'm like, yes, you can. So it's something I totally get that. That's why I love it so much too. It's a great responsibility, and you know, one that I don't think we take lightly.
Yeah. And so, I love that you said, I believe in you, you know, before you believe. I'm misquoting you, but believing in you before you actually believe in yourself. Because that's one of my my tagline, my brand is helping people facilitate their potential, their possibilities, and then helping them navigate their progress. Because it's the same thing. I see that you can do it. And it's kind of a double-edged sword, because as you also mentioned, sometimes you don't see it all the time. So I think that's a good thing. But when you do see those light bulbs come on, if you're training a room of 20 people and you see 5 light bulbs, you know, you don't focus on the 15, you focus on the 5, and that's kind of what keeps you going.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you had to pick 3 words, like going back to organizations now, the ones that you've seen that are successful versus the ones that are kind of struggling with their culture, maybe they're struggling with training, what 3, pick 3 words to describe what makes up a successful organization?
I would say the first one would be clarity. And I say clarity because people know what the vision is. They know what they're supposed to be working on. And the leaders are clear in the message. There's not, here's what I said, but what I'm doing is opposite of that. So the first one, it would be clarity. The second one would be, I think, empathy. I mentioned that before, is having that, you know, a lot of people, when the word empathy comes up, most people think of just emotional empathy. But, you know, empathy, cognitive empathy, is that ability to understand the different styles and work with those styles. And then there's empathetic concern. And empathetic concern is, I know what you need right now, and being able to articulate what your team needs right now. So when, you know, they always say the only thing that's constant is change. Most of the time, organizations are changing all the time. And even at a lower level, we as individuals are changing all the time. And when leaders have that empathetic concern of maybe somebody that's different stage, I'll use an example of different stages of life. Somebody might be a new parent, somebody might be a newlywed, or somebody might be at that age where they're taking care of their parents. And you got to bring that to work. And having that empathetic concern of giving that person the space or leeway or the conversation, I think is very important, because when you have those 3 levels of empathy, I think people are more productive for you, and people will work for you, as opposed to, you know, pulling back and kind of sitting back on the side. So empathy would be my second word. And then my third word would probably be safety. And I, you psychological safety has been, been around for a little while. People have been using that. I hope it is not becoming a buzzword, but I think psychological safety is just creating that culture where I can ask questions, I can learn, I can contribute and bring my style, and then others can do the same thing. And as we look at the different styles and mesh those things together, to me, those are cultures that win when you feel safe to be able to share, all your ideas, be able to have those disagreements, and be able to say, here's what I think, and give feedback. And then after you have those types of conversations, you have a better product, as opposed to, you don't feel safe and somebody gives, here's the project, here's the process, and nobody says anything. And then you don't get the best product that way.
And unfortunately, I think that happens too often. Being clear on what is the vision, the mission, what are the goals, people don't often have that. Teams need to find that, and managers, in order to be a leader, they need to help their team find that. It's much easier to put your best foot forward and be motivated to work when you have a clear vision and hope for the future.
Yeah.
But empathy, and again, like empathy and psychological safety, sometimes I feel like that. I see it, it's maybe becoming a buzzword, which I don't want. They are super important. I feel like it's the important part is people need to understand what is behind those words. And that can be a little tough, because you're right. Companies go through changes all the time, and the way they handle it, being empathetic, is the difference between people getting on board with what you want to do and not. Because, I've experienced this where a company goes through a change and then they don't want to talk about the why behind it or communicate it out. It's just like, here's what we're doing. There you go.
Yeah.
And the managers don't really understand how to communicate it. And when they're in a team meeting and they're trying to talk to you about it, it's very apparent that they don't understand it well enough. So then you're confused, like, what is happening? Why are we doing this? And then certain changes can, when you're changing pay, commission structures, when you change those things, there needs to be empathy with how is this change going to affect my people? It doesn't mean they, yes, people can be upset about it, but it doesn't mean they can't get over it. How you communicate it, the empathy that you show, will change the actual outcome from those changes. And then, speaking of psychological safety, I was just talking to someone the other day who his wife works in an environment where it feels like high school, like kind of being bullied, cannot speak up. And it's just like, it's really toxic. And that psychological safety can actually help you with changes. It can help you be more innovative, which I always think like companies are underrating this whole psychological safety thing. So I think it needs to be a part of training and development. It needs to be a part of leadership development, because sometimes I think, being the buzzword that it may be, people don't often understand how to create it. And you should feel like, I can speak up, I can share my ideas, and they're not going to be batted down. Like, I've got Amy Edmondson's books back here. I love her work. And all three of those things can drastically change, I think, an organizational culture from, one that's just okay to something that is truly amazing, where people are like, yeah, you got to come work here. So those three are huge. So,
and I was just gonna say, and I think it goes back to, the story I told of, the speeches from the leaders who won Best Places to Work. And I think it's similar there. None of them ever said, we want to win Best Places to Work. They just did the actions that created that culture. So I think when it comes to, clarity and empathy and psychological safety, the way you keep those from being buzzwords is, don't say it, just do it. Yeah. And then let the employees, or let your staff, or let the people that are working for you describe it that way.
Right. Because I think they're just making it about their people, and that's what it's ultimately about, is you are concerned about your people and their perspective. And when that happens, you tend to tap in to those three elements. If you're just concerned about the bottom line, and you're looking at how many big projects can we fit on our plate today? There's always like huge projects going on, and they always take precedence, which is why, like, maybe you can talk a little bit about that, because in my experience, I find that training is, if there's a problem, oh, training's a fix. But professional development and leadership development are really not usually on the top 3 or 5 priorities of companies. And the thing that I've, in the research I've done and what I found is, like, if you made that a priority, it would make all the other stuff a whole lot easier. And you're just pushing problems down the road. So like 5 years from now, because you haven't done these things, you're going to end up with more problems and realize, oh, now we need to invest in this. Oh, shoot, we didn't do that. Now we need to start thinking about leadership development. So maybe speak to that priority and kind of, in your experience, what you've seen, and maybe like, why do companies do that? Like, why is it not a priority, but why should it be in the top 3?
Well, I mean, I think it's, you know, this study, I'm sure you're familiar with it too, is that there's that 10-year gap from when somebody takes a leadership role to where they actually get leadership training, right? And then what happens in that 10-year gap is kind of a roll of the dice, right? Because you can pick up, either you go into that leadership role with having great people skills and great communication skills, or, as I mentioned before, you go into that role and you lead from the outside in with how have you led? And sometimes that isn't great. And then the other thing is, you know, when you first get into that leadership role, priority is the projects, priority is the process, priority is the meeting. And we lose sight of who's doing the project, who's doing the process, who's in these meetings. It's people.
No clarity.
Right.
No clarity.
So when you only think about when you take the people element out of it, you lose sight of the people that need to do it. I think that's where things kind of you fall off the cliff, because now we got to get these done. We got people to do it. I don't understand why they don't want to do it. That's because you haven't connected with them. That's because you don't understand how they work. That's because you're not clear on what you're doing. You're not clear on the vision, because the more people you add to a process, the more complex it is. And you can reduce that complexity by being clear with the people doing the process, by being clear with the people doing the project, by having empathy, you know, for the different minds that want to get you where you want to be. So that's what I would say is, don't stay so focused on the process or the work or the meetings. Remember that it's people involved in all of these. People drive all of these things. And when you work with the people doing the things, the process, the projects, and the lists and all those other things will take care of itself.
I think that's, you just hit the nail on the head, because I think about that all the time, that it's the people that are going to get you to where you want to go. And the mindset tends to be, how many projects can we fit in and get all this stuff done that's going to affect our bottom line, which it's like people, they just put their blinders are on, and that's all they can see is like, how do we get all this done? But they're forgetting that it's the people that you're going to have to motivate. Why do they want to do this project? Why do they want to do these things? And so if you focus on training and leadership, that is actually going to get you closer. That's what I wish companies understood. That's going to get you to where you want to go if you're actually focusing on it. Stop putting it at the bottom of the list. Because
no.
Were you going to say something?
Oh yeah, I thought I was cutting you off. Sorry.
Oh no. Okay. So let's see. So let's talk about, you talked a little bit about building relationships and using that in leadership. So I'm going to kind of put that on you. Like, can you talk about how you've built relationships within your career? How have you navigated them? And what have you learned from that?
And so relationships from my career in learning and development, I was probably in learning and development for about a month, and I had the opportunity to go to the Trainers Institute, ATD. And I was amazed at all the different types of minds that were in the room. I was also amazed at all the speakers that came and spoke. So I made it a point to write down names of the different people that I met and just, call them or email them when email was a thing. It's just, build relationships and say, how do you do this? Here's how I understand this. How do you do this? And what works for you? And then over a period of time, I ended up joining and being on the board of was ASTD at the time, ATD now. I was on the board there, and then that evolved, and I became a board member of Organizational Development Network, and a member there as well. And then I started reaching out. I started leveraging LinkedIn and reaching out to different people that I saw that was posting, educational content that connected with me. So I would reach out to them and just have different conversations. So from a career standpoint, my thing was just ask as many questions as I could, and then just have that. Initially when you get into something, you think you kind of know what the theory is, right? Especially as a trainer, the first thing they teach you when you learn a program is the theory. But when you have conversations with people and you understand, okay, in the real world, this is how this theory actually works, and this is how it shows up, and being able to connect the two. So doing that from a learning and development professional standpoint, and then being able to do that same process in the business that I was working in. So I was working at an insurance company at the time. I work at an insurance company now. So being able to have those same conversations with different departments and how they worked, and then having a conversation, on how here's a problem that learning and development can solve. So just having those intentional conversations on how can we connect. And I would say, a quick story, one of my best learning experiences when I had the opportunity to do a training with actuaries. And I had an idea of what actuaries were, just kind of, you think of actuaries as very analytical, very in the box. So that was just a mindset that I had around actuaries. I hadn't really had a conversation with actuaries yet until this training class. So I created in the class, part of it was around communication and communicating with different types of people. So this group of actuaries, they had an assignment to create a marketing plan on how to sell purple Converse to women. So, and they had 30 minutes to complete the assignment. And it was about 20 minutes in, and I noticed that they stopped talking. So I go over to their table and I ask, hey, what's going on? And they say, well, we've come to the conclusion that no one, based on what you told us, no one will buy purple Converse. And so we talked a little bit more. And what I came to understand was I'm a conceptual communicator. And like I said, they're more analytical. And what I came to understand is they said, we need more information. And they said, we could have looked it up on our phones. We could have used our computer and looked it up, but you didn't give us enough information for us to complete the assignment. And at first I was taken aback, because I'm like, everybody else could do this. Why couldn't you guys do it? And then that's where that empathy came into play, is different people need different pieces of information to complete something that you're asking them to do. Yeah. And from that point forward, I created a great relationship. It was 4 actuaries in the group. We ended up having a great relationship the whole time that I worked at that particular company. And we would just have conversations around. I would ask them, hey, what are you working on? How does this pricing model look? Or what does this forecasting look like? Or what does this particular theory look like? And then they would ask me some conceptual questions, because they would say, you're conceptual. We don't get that conceptual piece. Tell us what this looks like. So I think I just leveraged, making connections, seeing where I don't understand, and just asking more questions. So I guess that's a long road to your short question, is just building relationships by asking questions and recognizing that I don't know everything, and trying to fill in those gaps.
Well, you actually, through that, you brought up two really good points. Is staying curious. One, I think, is a great leadership trait to have, is just staying curious and asking good questions, and listening to people, but also on the training side. So there's staying curious. I'm like, that is something I say all the time. I tell my kids, I'm like, just listen, ask questions, and see how much you can learn. Like, I very much have that mindset. I want to learn as much as I can. And I was on the ATD board, and it's, getting started in this field. There's a lot to learn. How do you work with your SMEs and your managers and all those kinds of things? Because you're right, everyone needs something different, and you have to be able to put yourself in that person's shoes. So, like your story suggested, but also training, like, not just, leaders need to be able to say, I'm not the best at everything, I don't know. So do trainers. I've seen trainers that are not willing to say, I don't know, which that ends up hurting the learner. Like, I have been in classes before where I'm like, especially just starting out, if it was my first time teaching a class or whatever it was, I'm like, I have no problem saying, I don't know, but I'm going to get the answer for you. You just hang tight. Because again, just like leaders, relating with the person that is teaching and training the class, it creates a safer environment. If you're willing to say, I don't know, it creates a place where people feel like, oh, okay, like they can relax. I've seen that happen before. I'm like, yeah, I don't know everything. Like, I'm here to teach you, but I'm also here to learn from you too. People that I've taught in my life have taught me just as much, which is kind of cool. So I love that you said those things. So my next question, we're going to talk about failures. So speaking of, I don't know, what has been your biggest failure, and what did you learn from it?
So I think it actually goes back to what we just talked about in not knowing. So I think when I first got into training, one of my biggest blind spots was being able to say I didn't know, because I placed not knowing as a ding against me on not being a good trainer. So I had a project. We actually it was a customer service training that I was to build for a production. It was a call center, and the leader, it was actually the VP of the call center. If this was an off the shelf program, she wanted to change like 80% of the content in the off the shelf program, and I made the mistake of saying yes.
Oh.
And it was the first session we did. She sat in the first session, and it was a complete failure, because you could tell I was changing stuff. You could tell I wasn't comfortable with the material. Off the shelf, I could do it. I could probably do it with my eyes closed. But now I had changed some things, and it didn't look natural. I didn't look very comfortable. And the feedback she gave me was, you didn't meet my standard, and that really hurt.
Yeah.
And it took me, I would say a couple months to let that sink in, because it was still a blind spot. It was still me saying I don't know means that I'm not a good trainer. And then I got some coaching, actually got some coaching after that. And they actually said what you just said a few minutes ago, is your ability to say you don't know actually brings more credibility. Your ability to say no actually brings more credibility, especially in that they were coaching me on that situation. They say, especially in that situation, you have to say, maybe we can do something here, but to change something that's off the shelf, that much. The coach actually said, I don't know what you were thinking when you said, yes, you could do it. You probably needed at least 6 months to prepare for that.
Yeah.
So I think that my biggest failure, and I'm glad it was early in my training career, was, like you said, being able to say, I don't know. And also learning to say no, but also saying, but here's what we can do. And then after that, I was able to say, okay, that works. This doesn't work. And that whole, have you heard of the kind of the yes and? So yes and is, okay, we can do this and we need to keep most of this in, or something like that. So
Okay. Yeah.
I think, yeah, that, and it was, with it being such a senior leader, I thought that was a big, that was a big ding on me, but it ended up working out, fortunately. But
I think, that story, I gotta say, most people in the training world can relate. I just can't imagine anyone not being able to relate. I know I was in several of those moments where when I was just starting out learning a new industry, and I don't want to say no. I'm very much like, I love collaborating. And I like to go along, I'm very easygoing. So I'll just go with whatever, that they want to do, but it's not our job in training to just take orders, right? It's just like selling, don't take orders. In training, you have to work with them and kind of guide them to what the best decision is, not to tell them what to do, but hey, here's your ideas. Here's what I think would be best for the learner, and kind of come together. So, what advice, speaking of when you just starting out and learning from that failure, what advice would you have for people just starting out in training, that people who want to break into this field, and they're just starting out? So what would you tell someone?
I would say, taking from that experience, I think from that point forward, I started to learn how to be more consultative. Kind of what you mentioned before is not so much taking the order, but let's have a conversation about what you want. So that first piece is having a clear understanding of what you want, and how does that align with what you can do and the resources that you have, because that's going to set you up for success, but it's also going to set the person delivering the material up for success. It also sets the class, those that are attending, sets them up for success as well. So I think just having that consultative approach, I think is very important. And then the other thing I would say for somebody getting into training and development is to read. Read as much as you can on personal development, learning and development strategies, research, white papers on training trends and what things that are coming. Because especially now, with some of the trends, if you look at AI is becoming very prevalent in our world. How's that going to affect the work that we do? How's that going to affect what organizations need, and how they access it? And how do you collaborate with AI to understand how you can do that versus just throwing your hands up and saying, we're going to lose out to that. So I think just, like I said, reading, having clarity on what you can do and what they need, and just staying focused on what's coming down the pike, and staying ahead of the game.
So as far as reading, do you have recommendations for both? What are your top 3 books in leadership or just development in general? What are your top 3?
So there is I'm probably going to get the name. I wish I had it in here. It's a big red. It's called The Fifth Dimension of Learning. It's a big red book, and it has a ton of activities in it. It has a ton of learning theories in it. But it's The Fifth Dimension, and I'll have to send you the author of the book. But I have the pages are in my book. The pages are out. There's post-it notes all over it. So that book, there's a book called The Art of Possibility by Ben Zander. And in that book kind of speaks to me because, as I mentioned before, part of my branding is helping people see their potential and possibilities. So the art of possibility is how do you reframe? How do you reframe your mindset to move towards possibilities as opposed to limiting yourself? And then I would say, I don't know, my third book, I'm kind of big into NLP. So I have a NLP book for dummies. I love all the training books for dummies when it comes to training. So there's a book called NLP Coaching and NLP for Dummies that I reference a lot because it's similar to the Fifth Dimension book. It has, you can learn theories, and then it gives you different types of nuggets to go research other pieces of information. And for me, a book that has information that gives me kind of a breadcrumb trail to go research other information is a huge attractor for me. So Probably those three books
Okay.
right are top for me.
Awesome. Well, this has been a really fun conversation. I love learning about your WIN strategy, and it's fun to talk to someone you have so much in common. Like, oh, that's totally me too. I think when I talk to people in the training world, we share a lot of the same characteristics as we do. We love coaching and seeing that light bulb go off. And now I've got several really big takeaways from this interview. Stay curious. So if you're watching this, stay curious, ask questions. So thank you for being on the podcast today. Why don't you, can you tell people watching where to find you? I will put it in the description. I'll put the link to your site. But if you tell people where to find you, LinkedIn, website, all the things.
Yep, you can find me on LinkedIn. It's Terry Lee on LinkedIn. It might be Terry L. Lee on LinkedIn. Instagram at T Lee Speaks. And then you can find my podcast on tlspeaks.com, my website. And there's a link to my podcast. Lead from the WIN side is on that website as well. So
awesome. And I will put all the links to that in the description again. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Lawrence. Glad to be the inaugural video podcast. So